Okay, welcome everyone. I have a lot of slides. We're gonna be in racing mode here for a while.
In my car.
So
We'll grab it. Perfect.
a lot of this at the first is going to be, I'm just going to review what Pagels covers in the last half of chapter 5. If there's something you want to comment on, you're free to make a comment, but yeah, they've already done that. So let's get going. This is chapter 5, part 2, Constantine and the Catholic Church. So in 312, Constantine defeated his brother-in-law Maxentius at the Battle of Milvian Bridge, October 28, 312. Eusebius, we talked about him, said that Constantine and his soldiers had a vision in which God promised victory if the sign of the Chi-Rho was shown on their shields. And those are the first 2 letters of Christ's name. And so when you do this, so when you're looking at the symbol there on his shield,
What?
Hasn't been used for a while.
So this is Chi. This is Chi, the Greek symbol Chi, and then this is Rho. So that was this. Sign that they put on their shield, and they were victorious. So he thought God had a hand in his victory. Later,
So powerful army, right?
well, he was fighting, but he was fighting the Roman army.
Oh,
Later, that was in 312. 12 years later, he defeated the Eastern Emperor Licinius, and he became the sole Roman emperor. They had a Western and an Eastern emperor, and he became the sole Roman emperor at that point. And after that, when he became the sole Roman emperor, he declared amnesty for the Christians and became their patron, which gave the Christians enormous benefits, but he only gave the benefits to the ones he called the lawful and most holy Catholic Church. And at this point, it's the small c Catholic. So going from a state persecuted faith to a state supported faith was a revolution indeed for Christianity. And just briefly, what do you see as positive and negative consequences for the Christian faith? And those could be then, that could be now.
Well, I think separation of church and state is good.
Okay.
When the state starts picking favorites, that is.
I think a negative in the modern setting, many of the European countries, the state supports the religion. So I know in Germany, they get money from the government, so there's no incentive to go out and try to get people inside your door. They can be empty on Sunday and they still get the same amount of money from the government. So a lot of people feels like that hurt Christian movement in Europe.
So that was a negative.
That's a negative. Yeah.
And what's the religion in Germany called?
Lutheran primarily, but they're also
Lutheran.
Catholic.
And
Lutheran
so
and
that's
Catholic.
supported, only Lutherans are supported?
No, both. Yeah.
It saved, I would say, part of it saved Christianity, and because it was kind of dwindling and they were all kind of getting killed off. So for it to be endorsed. By
Well,
the
I'm going to didn't who was it that said the blood of the martyrs has been the seed of our Christian faith, and that they were growing because people were
Is that before or after Constantine?
before, I think.
Well, I know, but they were growing, but they were getting killed. I don't know.
They were getting killed. I'm not disputing they got
Yeah,
killed.
I don't know. Was the trajectory the same? That's my question.
Okay. Well, anyway, we recognize that there could be pluses and minuses
Yeah,
for having the state support your religion.
yeah.
Well, state supported faith will end up marginalizing other.
Yes.
Right.
That could be a definite.
Is not a good thing. Yeah.
So the details of what happened then, at least in particular, Constantine had property that had been taken from this church returned to them, and the Christian clergy got some tax benefits, and the Constantine allocated money, imperial money, to build new churches, repair old churches, and from the imperial grain supply, which was extracted from their tribute countries like Galilee. They took the grain from there, bring it to Rome. That got distributed to those who were needy. So those are some at least positive things at the time, but it had some negative consequences definitely for the Jews. And these were three things that were passed shortly after Constantine became the sole emperor. They were forbidden entry into Jerusalem except one day of year. If you tried to convert or stop your fellow Jews from converting to Christianity, you were burned alive. And they were ordered that they could not seek or accept converts to Judaism. So
They were marginalized.
So they were marginalized as, and Jews had a fairly, the relationship with Rome was, they got some exemptions because their monotheism, they were, Rome didn't force them to do certain things because they recognized they were monotheistic. So they were taking away things that favored gave Judaism at least, they weren't favored status, but at least they weren't persecuted for some things.
Law about not proselytizing is why Judaism is not a proselytizing religion today. In fact, if somebody's interested in becoming Jewish, they say the rabbi won't even listen to you until your third request.
I think I've heard you say that before, yeah.
That's true.
So where was Constantine living at this point in time?
That's from the rabbi.
Istanbul?
Or was Constantine in Istanbul or?
No, he was, well, at that point, he was in Rome.
He was in Rome.
He hadn't moved the capital at that point.
Okay.
Okay, so those were some of the consequences. Well, although there were benefits to the so-called Orthodox Christians, everything all wasn't peace and harmony among the Christian different groups. And there was a really acrimonious dispute between the Bishop Alexander. He was bishop down in Egypt, and there was this Libyan priest, Libya's in Africa too. So Arius was this priest who had a different idea about things. Anyway, Alexander heard that Arius was preaching that Christ, while divine, was not divine in the exact same sense as God the Father. Upon hearing that, he convened a council of Egyptian bishops, and they declared Arius' views heretical and excommunicated him and everybody who liked or sided with him. So when that happened, bishops in Syria, Palestine, and Asia Minor, what would be Turkey today, they had their convened their own council, and they said Arius' views were entirely orthodox. They urged Alexander to accept Arius, but he refused, and back into his church, welcoming him back, but he didn't. He refused to do that. And when Constantine became the sole Roman emperor, remember this dispute started at least 318, now it's 324. Constantine is the sole emperor, and he's would like to have this controversy ended. It was still ongoing. So he wanted to settle the controversy, strengthen the Christian groups and unify them, and his alliance with them. He saw some benefits for having a unified Christian church. So he ordered a council, a meeting of the bishops, and he was going to pay for it and have it at Nicaea to come up with some standard formulation of Christian faith. And so in 325, the next year after he became the sole emperor, they convened at Nicaea, and he was in attendance. They met from June through July. Wikipedia said that he invited 1,800 and around 300 attended. Athanasius, and there was kind of a dispute on how many it was, but the Athanasius said 318.
They argued about crowd size in those days.
But the total attendance was somewhere between, they think, between 1,200 and 1,900 when you count all the priests and other staff, I guess you'd call it, of the bishops that went with them. And there were supporters for both Alexander and Arius at the council meeting in Nicaea. Alexandrian or Athanasius wanted to make sure that their position was the one included in any creed they agreed to in the council, and they were successful in doing this. They had two key phases they wanted to be included in the creed. One, Jesus Christ was God and he was, quote, begotten, not made. The other was that Christ was a one being with God. This was a phrase that they particularly wanted because this made Christ's divinity the same as the divinity of God the Father, which was in opposition and excluded Arius's view, since he said the divinity of Christ was not the same as that of God the Father. It was very controversial. Why? Why did there was kind of a pushback on what they wanted on the second phrase, evidently.
I always thought it had something to do with, the whole Trinity thing hadn't been developed well enough yet.
Well, okay.
That, you know, that they're talking about multiple gods instead of just one God.
Yeah.
If Jesus as God.
Oops.
They had to work into the Trinity of
Yeah.
being one.
Well, Pagels says those opposed said, well, this view is not in the scriptures and it's not in our Christian tradition.
What is their understanding of the word begotten? Do you know?
I don't know. I kind of had a question in my mind. How could Jesus or Christ be begotten and still be at the very beginning with God? It sounds like there was one was preceded the other to me.
To
By
me, it
that
always
word.
meant like born, but I don't know, maybe there was another meaning to it.
Well, earlier in the chapter, early in the book, Pagels had a different kind of said begotten could have meant unique, which would be really different than saying begotten. Begotten to me is kind of like,
Made.
yeah,
They got made human form.
yeah. So,
Well, it always, I mean, I always said begotten of the Father, so I just assumed it had to do with the story of Mary and the Holy Spirit.
yeah, that kind of, but when you start talking about before that, then what is begotten? So unique was another off definition, or she had suggested earlier, but that always brings questions in my mind, the word begotten. But anyway, the controversy evidently was on the second phrase, and they said, well, scriptures don't support that, and neither is our tradition. They said, isn't it extreme and contrary to the Gospels to say that Jesus Christ is essentially the same as the God the Father? So what passages in the Gospels would you think support their view that it wasn't contrary to the Gospels, that Jesus his divinity was the same as the divinity of God the Father?
Can I take you back 1 second? And the archaic meaning of the word begotten is to bring something into existence or create something from nothing.
From nothing.
And it goes on to say,
Okay.
God is said to have begotten all things as he is the only eternal being. So that's the archaic. The current meaning simply means to father.
Yeah.
Sorry, mothers.
So does that say that Christ was made out of nothing?
Was a contradiction. I mean, it certainly.
That he was already existing? That I have a problem with that word,
Yeah,
but
it supports Arian's view.
yeah, to me it seems like even though they're
But he was a heretic. He lost out.
yeah. Anybody think of scriptures that would support not using this phrase?
Well, he refers to Father in the Garden of Gethsemane, he prayed to. And it seems like two different entities. What their status is, I'm not sure.
Well, since he said not my will, but your will,
Yeah.
would kind of suggest that there's
They're
a,
saying
he's
name.
deferring to God. So to me, that would be, I don't know.
I know in the book of Hebrews, it says that Jesus did not think himself equal to God.
Yeah.
He did not. I mean, it's very clear. But it's not a gospel. It's one of the letters.
And I've always thought that one of the controversies in the early church deciding, when did holy, and some of the Christians thought it was when he was baptized and dove kicked down.
Right.
And that's when it brought the Spirit. So that story kind of confused people at that time. I could see that as one.
Well, and then there's other passages where Jesus defers to saying, well, people saying, well, when's this going to happen? He said, well, nobody knows, but God the Father. So I don't know. I just find I'd probably see their support. So anyway, Athanasius and Alexander, they carried the day. But Arius' views survived for centuries after that in some form in some Eastern churches, which his view acknowledged the Father had priority, or I guess you'd say, over the Son. So that was his view. So here's these guys with the original Nicene Creed. And here is the creed itself. I'm not going to read all of it, but we'll leave it up there for a while. You can take a look at it. You can see there on the upper right, there's the phrase begotten, not made, of one substance with the Father.
Begotten from the Father, only begotten.
And here's where I have a kind of, and he became incarnate and became man, comma, and suffered and rose again. Really doesn't talk about his life. I have issues with that problem. And then it goes about resurrection. Okay, and then I've written at the bottom, and then it stops, and then the Holy Spirit. And that's kind of the statement of beliefs. But then the original creed of 325 had this addition. This sounds like this is pointed right at Arius and saying, but there are those who say this, and
It tells you what the early writers of this thought about was important about Jesus.
yeah,
Obviously, the Christ things that he did in the end, and then all of this about how he came into being,
right.
and like you said, nothing in between really mattered.
Well, like,
Sermon on the Mount, yeah, okay, that was pretty good, but we don't need to put that in there.
I'll jump in. I'm
There's-
right behind you.
there's
here,
Ryan,
so
okay.
I'm the voice, but I don't. It is interesting, like Paul said. You see what's important to them, or maybe another way to look at it is not so much as what's most important, but what was most contested. So it's like this shows the fault line of disagreement, because one can, I guess, take from this that the life of Jesus, though maybe important, wasn't hotly contested. There's nothing about about his teachings and miracles, but it's the nature of Christ and all the things we've been talking about.
So you're saying kind of like they're trying to settle the disputed
Mhm.
things.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting for Arius at the very last and say, and these, we're going to, and can't even say it, probably anathematize these guys that are saying this stuff. Kind of a curse on them.
Curse or condemn, Matt. I looked it up.
Well, it got approved in 325 at their meeting. And if there were 318, like Athanasius says, 200 to 220 that Wikipedia said signed the creed. And those who disagreed, they just left and didn't sign it. So if you had been there, would you have signed or left without signing? And why would you done one or the other? I probably would have left because I probably think I would side with Arias. I think I would side with him. But anyway, that's just me.
I think I would have stayed, but just argued further.
And sided with Arias?
I don't know that I side entirely with him, but I certainly wouldn't completely agree with the Nicene Creed.
Yeah,
The thing that always has bothered me is if Christ is, or Jesus is the only begotten Son, that means he's the only Son created by God. Who the heck created the rest of us?
well, we'll get into that a little bit.
Okay,
I don't have an answer for that, but there is a Athanasius has something to say about that. So after the creed was approved and adopted, the Orthodox Christians kind of started coalescing into one Catholic apostolic church. And Constantine, who was present at the meeting, he endorsed the creed, and it became the official doctrine. All Christians must accept to participate in the church that Constantine recognized, the lawful and Catholic Church. Pagels gives Constantine more, she's more charitable to him than I have ever read about in the past. I always had the impression that he put his thumb on the, kind of on the scale a bit. But she says he did not dictate the outcome of the proceedings, and he urged the bishops to come up to their own conclusion, their own consensus between all these rival factions. So that was a little bit different than what I read other places about Constantine. He definitely wanted to have a consensus, though. He wanted to get unity. He was after unity in the church, partly for his own political reasons, I think, but he still wanted the church to unify. But this
Maybe a fine point, but I'm wondering if you have to unity. That's the same.
okay. Well,
Sounds
either
like
one,
they want to live
yeah.
well, either one would diminish dissent. And of course, he, as the ruler of all of the country of empire, wants unity and conformity. He wants not to have disputes arise.
Yeah, you have to remember, I mean, he's got to this where he is because they fought a civil war in the Roman Empire over who was going to be the emperor, and he won. So he's aware that there's people that really aren't in favor of him, and he's like to kind of solidify his position. So he was hoping that this would be a basic framework on Christians could agree on. And I thought he sounded pretty reasonable here. He thought as sensible Christians could agree to disagree, I guess, about theological questions in a spirit of brotherly love. But was he being naive?
I think so.
Okay. So Athanasius, his side won on the creed issue, and he campaigned in Egypt to get all the Christians to unite under the creed. Was he being practical and
I
tolerant?
think if I can jump in,
Sure.
he may have had a good cause. Part of it's political. Empires do not survive when there's a certain amount of dissent, but perhaps his timeline was too short. He tried to get too much changed or unified all at once. That's just what I'll just posit that take on it.
Yeah, I think, and that makes me think of Joseph III for some reason that popped in my head, because Joseph III tolerated a lot. He just kind of outlived and let it slowly coalesce around his positions. That's in our church. Well, this controversy with Arius didn't go away. And Athanasius' position was, he became the bishop after Alexander died. But his position kind of fluctuated. Sometimes he was in power, sometimes he wasn't. Sometimes he was exiled. And Constantine sometimes supported him and sometimes he didn't. I just asked, what do you think accounted for that being in and out of power?
Politics as usual.
Do you think Athanasius had part of his own doing, that he was in and out, maybe because he was a little bit? It's Pagel says that he did not take orders from Constantine, even though Constantine's the emperor. He bucked the emperor, so that probably was part of why he was
Yeah.
out some of the time.
Would we call Athanasius the Pope then? I mean,
He was the bishop.
He was just a bishop,
But that's not a pope. They didn't have a pope.
not at that point. Yeah.
But he was the top bishop.
Well, he was the top bishop in Egypt.
Yeah.
The Bishop of Rome would be the Pope, whoever was the bishop.
At that point, though, I don't think they'd
I don't,
settled.
they didn't, yeah, it wasn't called that at that time, but
Yeah,
that's what evolved in that.
yeah,
They've been disagreeing about this for 300 years now.
yeah,
It's, deep-seated, feelings about what's right, and a lot of the stuff that's in the creed, and a lot of the things that, we came to believe about Jesus as Christ are pretty, and we see it now, they're pretty much human constructs that somebody else thought of. And I can understand, the way you keep order is you make some laws, you make some principles, and you say, okay, we're going to get along, but everybody's got to accept this as the core values of our Catholic small c church, our universal church. Otherwise, you just, you have chaos.
yeah.
And I think they're just tired of the chaos and trying to do something to get people in line.
Okay. Now we'll come back to that. Well, by 367, Athanasius, he was getting into his 60s, but he was more secure as the bishop. So he wrote this very famous letter, which gives us what is known as the earliest known list of the 27 books that make up the New Testament. In the letter, he also tells the Christians to reject the apocryphal books. They're going to lead you astray, and don't trust them. Well,
Talking about the Gnostic Gospels, though, right?
yeah, I would say those, and maybe some other stuff. I don't know what I'll use, but some monks evidently decided to buy Athanasius. They removed more than 50 books from their monastery library, put them in a jar, and they were discovered in Nagamati 1600 years later. So not everybody read the letter and fulfilled every request. Athanasius said we should, well, he was worried about the heretics because he knew they could read the scriptures in the same scriptures that Orthodox had, but in a different way and understand them differently. So he said there's two things they need to do. They need to use dianoia to read it and shun epinoia. And this is the best I could come up with a definition of those two. One is dianoia uses critical or objective thinking to understand the text. Epinoia uses subjective, your thinking based on your feelings and personal experiences to understand the text. He was saying you can't trust epinoia because it'll lead you astray. Now,
personal experience that we have. Okay.
well, he just was real worried about people reading it unorthodox ways. Here we are, Jonathan.
No spiritual practice is Sundays in those days.
Yeah.
No community of Christ.
Athanasius
Joseph Smith.
said that because of human sin, the image of God, regard Jonathan, the image of God in everyone was beyond repair. Jesus Christ was the only human being who embodied the image of God. So is that?
I just think Christianity has grown since then. I mean, they've got books and books and books of what does the body of Christ look like? It's the church. What do we have we all have spiritual gifts. We have priesthood offices. All of that is, we are in the image of God. I mean, Christianity has gone way beyond that since then. All of Christianity, not just Community of Christ.
Well, and if Athanasius said it was blasphemous to emulate Christ, who should we emulate?
Well,
I thought that my whole life, that I was trying to be more like Jesus.
well, you're an Arius guy, I guess, at this point. But anyway, what about this statement? God became human so that humankind might become divine. And then the Pagels adds all that, kind of interpreting all that one must do is believe and receive God's salvation. So then, what does he think of divinity then? Is human divinity the same as God's divinity? And what is divinity then?
Circular. Yeah, because earlier they were arguing about, was Jesus the same embodiment of God? And then they're saying we're beyond here. But Jesus came, and now we can be divine. I think this is very unusual logic.
Okay.
And in other words, we just don't know.
Really, some of the things Athanasius said are contradictory, like number 2 and number 3 are totally the opposite to me.
And it sounds a little bit Mormon. I was gonna say, it sounds like we can become God, we can become divine.
Well,
You know, well, I guess it depends on what you define divine.
yeah. Are there levels of divinity?
Well, I used to think there were
Three.
I know, I was gonna say.
Three heavens.
I don't know. I'm just, evidently, I mean, if there's human divinity, if humans can become divine, then surely he wasn't equating that with God's divinity, was he?
Well, I think the evangelicals of today would, or some would say that through God's atonement, or through Jesus's atonement, our sins are washed away and we are given the righteousness of Christ, which is kind of to dissolve our own merits. And when God looks at us or judges us, he sees Christ and not us. So, we're baptized, we're made dead to sins. Now, I don't know if that was running through the mind of Athanasius here, but that's one interpretation. And divinity is not, we're not becoming gods, but we're becoming more wedded to Christ or something to that.
Well, is being sanctified the same as becoming divine?
I'd substitute the word spiritual for divine.
Okay.
And I would
Spiritual.
I would quote the father, my father.
Oh, that's Jonathan's father.
It
Okay.
says
Seed begotten?
he believed he believed sincerely that Christ became human, because without him becoming human, there's no example for us. Everything he did, we are capable of doing. And I think I guess my personal belief is that Christ came to show us a way to be spiritual. Divine is maybe a little too strong. I like the word spiritual better. He came to teach us the things we need to do. And it's pretty simple, the 2 basic commandments: to become spiritual and become closer to God. And since we all fall short, that's why we have these periodic series of the sacrament that restores that through communion. That's what I'm talking about. But that's what my father believed. That's what I believe.
That's also from the book of Hebrews. That statement about Christ becoming as we are, subject to all of the same temptations and hardships of life, so that we could see that because Christ did it, we can do it also.
And my father would argue that we are all begotten of God. We're all sons and daughters of God. And you've heard that term before.
Yeah.
And so it's not just Christ, but Christ was a special messenger that enabled us to see the way to become more spiritual and closer to God.
Weren't they earlier in an earlier chapter arguing about I can't remember who it was saying we become, one position was that we are children of God. And the other side was saying, no. So that's kind of what you're saying.
Yeah.
I mean, children. Another thing about this divinity thing, I mean, in the Bible, or people at least talk about, they believe in angels and other
Celestial beings.
celestial beings. Okay, whatever. Are those some level of divinity? I guess I'm not going to answer the question, but I'll just leave it there because it brings up questions about divinity in my mind. So after his victory, the newly legitimate Catholic Church, small c Catholic, gained enormous appeal. They can now openly invite potential converts to join their assembly. It claimed to possess the truth, the offer of eternal salvation. So many people joined the church. Some were attracted because the church's teachings, and they didn't fear persecution now because here the emperor was endorsing the church. I mean, he was promoting it. Of course, there's always somebody sees a personal benefit and they join for their own personal advantage. They wanted to be on the inside group now, boy, I would take it. And now that the alliances have shifted, one consequence of the revolution initiated by Constantine was that the authority of bishops was greatly enhanced and their authority to establish the boundaries of the church's faith. So this is back to what James said earlier. Did orthodoxy succeed in unifying the practiced Christian groups and save them from splintering into oblivion? Okay.
Here we are. Now, it did splinter quite a bit, but not into oblivion.
Still is.
When did Martin Luther come along? Yeah.
15, 17, 19, something like that.
But you think about how unified they were, relatively unified they were until Martin Luther came along. I mean, they were the Catholic Church.
Well,
And, and they killed people in order to stay that way. Let's be blunt.
And he actually took books out of the New Testament, put them in the appendix, kind of like we did with some of the stuff in the Covenant. Chapter, what he didn't like or didn't think were equal in spiritual values of the gospel.
Are you saying Constantine did that?
No,
Oh, Martin Luther.
Martin Luther.
After all of this was settled, then Martin Luther coming to 1490 or something.
Yeah.
Seemed like
That was.
He didn't like the book of James in particular. He had called that the straw something,
Pistol of Straw.
epistle of straw. Okay, there you are.
Well, that's too bad. That's what we're using today. Well, good thing we're not Lutheran.
Well, because James says, I'll show you my faith by my works. And he was big on justification by faith.
Yeah.
So the faith versus works thing was big in James, and he didn't, that's why he called it, like Brian said, the epistle of straw.
That's the other thing we're talking
So, okay, well, we're just giving you a warm up then.
about. Yeah.
Stay tuned.
Oh, do the Lutherans not have? what they-
Oops.
it's in the back of their Bible. Well, Martin Luther's Bible. I don't know what the Lutherans is today.
They use it.
They
Yeah.
do.
They
Okay.
they ignore Martin Luther on that.
Oh, no.
Okay, he did it in 1517.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is a little bit about orthodoxy. Orthodox teachings often assume divine revelation is opposed to human perception, rules out truths found through intuition. That was the epinoia part of it. Does orthodoxy help us avoid self-deception, which is what Athanasius was worried about with epinoia and using intuition? We have it. Humans we easily deceive ourselves in what we think we know and all this stuff. So does orthodoxy help us avoid that?
I think in some respects, orthodoxy is probably useful in providing some common beliefs and structures to religion that people can, even if you don't totally agree with, you can acknowledge that they're there.
Okay.
But I think it also diminishes the spiritual aspects of our journey, where we are exploring and trying to seeking to know more about God. If you say, this is the truth here, and beyond that, don't stray out to the other. That kind of makes it dogmatic, and I don't like dogma.
Yeah.
It seems very limiting.
Yeah.
And it seems like orthodoxy is the starting point, if you can decide which orthodoxy you believe. But then from there, you almost have to grow into spiritual gifts. So I think it's a necessary evil, but I'm not sure it really helps.
Well, that's exactly what the Gnostic said. What you just said is that, it's a starting place, but then we can,
You need to take the next steps.
we
What
take
they
the next step in our journey.
go
closer
take
to
the second
God from
baptism
that.
and all that.
Use that as kind of the platform, but
Measure.
When God gave us a brain, and as we get new information, we expand from that dogma.
So the leaders thought of themselves as guardians of truth, and that they had God's authority on what the truth is. There can be some.
These kind of rubs me the wrong way. That's always the kind of, don't worry, you're pretty real upset about it. It's like, it's been figured out. You don't need to think about it. No, we do need to think about it. And try to embrace it or sort it out or flow or whatever.
So some downsides are, acknowledging there are other points of view. Well, acknowledging much less welcoming, it says. And then this often leads to, we have the truth, you don't have the truth. It gets to be either or. It's all one way to heresy. Okay, let's go. Heresy wanted to, Irenaeus wanted to expel the Valentinians as heretics. Well, he thought it was necessary. He didn't just want to. He thought it was necessary. And they got expelled. Did it impoverish the church? Did it impoverish those who were expelled? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I would think it would have impoverished the church itself. Because they then lose those different voices.
If you value those voices.
Well, yeah, but somebody might.
Yeah, true.
I don't know if they were necessarily impoverished because then they were free to.
But they lost the fellowship of the other other members,
Yeah.
and some of them were like a heretic often got burned at the stake.
Yes, I would have been burned as a witch, I'm sure. Yeah. Yeah, that in that way, yeah.
We're back to epinoia because Pagels says they weren't necessarily seeking a different doctrine so much as seeking insight. The glimpses you could get through epinoia.
Can you define that again? I know you did in an earlier slide. Epinoia would be.
Subjective thinking based on kind of like a spiritual intuition, things based upon your feelings or personal experiences.
Where's she from?
Probably.
Well,
I mean, that was kind of what I got out of definition. Yeah.
As for me, I think a balance between epinoia and what's the other one?
Dianoia.
Yep. I think we need to find a healthy balance
Okay.
between objective and subjective.
Okay.
And
Heresy means choice. That's all
Right.
that is.
That's that'll be coming up.
Oh, sorry.
Well, that's okay. You bring it up.
I really like that word better. I like the fact that there's choice, like what you were saying, epinoia versus dianoia, like each of us has to make that choice.
now we have heresy in our secular culture. I mean, I see a parallel. And I see, well, I don't want to steer us right into politics, but you know, we have different cultural taboos, and you know, like tolerance and diversity are very lauded in today's society, but and if you go against that, you're kind of, they wouldn't call you a heretic, but oh, you're backwards, or you know, you're what's wrong with this country.
We cancel.
We will cancel you. We will.
Okay.
So all I'm saying is we had heretics, we had that label then, we have it now, but in a secular.
Okay.
Well, and I would say that I have found that throughout history, because I remember the 60s and the church was pretty contentious, while there was a lot of contention around a lot of riots, a lot of assassinations, a lot of all that kind of thing.
Yep.
So I've noticed that in the past.
Well, this epinoia involved some activities which we practice every Sunday. Meditation, worship, prayer, can lead to action.
I
That
think
in-
culturally, I mean, sometimes this is hard for us to relate to, because I think this, for many people in that time, you know, thinking about this and worrying about this was consuming.
Yeah.
You know, we still do religion. We enjoy coming to church. We enjoy the fellowship. This class, you know, we enjoy exploring the history and the understandings of theology, but we're not consumed by it. You know, we have Sunday afternoon, we're going to go watch football, and you know, we've got the internet, and we've got lots of other distractions in life that take our thinking away from it. I feel like for people in that time, this was probably extremely important.
Yeah.
You know, it's not well, it's life or death, because they're killing each other, right?
Yeah, I remember, I can't cite what they were talking about. I can remember back then there was discussion where they'd say, like if you went to the barbershop, they were talking about these theological principles and arguing about one side or the other side. Now, I can't remember what the theology was they were discussing. But it took up some of their time. That's true. Well, I see I'm running out of time here. I better speed up. So this is choosing. She says choosing is what heresy originally meant. Do we all practice choosing? We all decide, pick and choose what scriptures we like to believe in or accept, and what ones we don't? Are we all doing what heretics do, which she says that's what heretics do? Back to our problem, which has come up several times. How do we tell the truth from lies? This is what orthodoxy was trying to solve. And this issue was called discernment of spirits by the ancients. It's not easy to do. You can take the easy path, you can take and avoid the hard work of discernment. The easy path can have some dangers to it, the same as well as the other way. You might not really correctly discern, and you might be misled. So there's choosing. You want to say anything about choosing, Jane, or you?
Well, that last question is what I think choosing, you know, that's where the agency and a person's brain comes into power again. Says, wait a minute, my leader, whether it's the church leader, you know, things that Joseph Smith said our church has rejected over the years. That could be heresy, you know, because we didn't follow what the prophet said in the beginning. Well, that's because our church values discernment. And so that to me is what choice means to us as a church. And that's what I'm personally.
Okay. So this is something I think Jonathan alluded to earlier. Sooner or later, most of us find we have to strike out our own and make our own path. Does this happen? Anyone here?
Everyone.
Who said everyone?
That was
Jeremy, I agree
Oh,
with that.
okay.
I did.
Okay, Jeremy, we heard you. Okay. She said she loved to hear the testimonies who have engaged in spiritual discovery to seek and find. And so Does this remind us of anything in our church?
Figures?
Isn't that where we started? Somebody was seeking. Does this scripture come to anybody's mind?
Oh, it's James. It's James.
I mean, I think in our modern day community of Christ, where we actually have spiritual formation ministers, people that are leaders in the church for that particular reason, we're being invited to this. This is the direction that the modern church has taken us, is to explore our spiritual understandings and our relationship with God, not to just be satisfied with what the first presidency says. That's the law and we're done. Now when the church comes together in conference, every quorum has the right to consider the resolutions, and we've got this shared revelation idea that we've been exploring for 10 years or so now, where we're all encouraged to be part of the prophetic process. I mean,
How many times have you heard the word discernment?
this is where we are.
The discernment process. How many times have you heard
At
that?
reunion, Carl Long had a great thing. It was lean into curiosity.
Okay.
That's where it's leading us.
We've sang for years, but the Lord has yet more light and truth that spread forth from His word, her word.
Has anyone heard a testimony about somebody who came into the church because they were seeking?
Actually, in my class, you have two of them.
Well, I got this out of another book I've been reading called The Lost Way, which is about the Q document and the Gospel of Thomas. And so I'm going to quote some of this straight from The Lost Way by Stephen Patterson. He says, seeking is the heart of the wisdom tradition, and it makes the wisdom tradition makes meaning only when people hear and contemplate it for themselves. It does not state the truth with a capital T. It provokes you to seek for truth, and everyone is on equal footing when we're seeking. If you would have the truth, you must seek the truth, and when you find it, you must advocate for it. I thought that was all well stated. So from the Nag Hammadi discovery, we've learned that there were other gospels besides those in the New Testament, and the Gospel of Thomas is one of those other gospels. And it's part of the wisdom tradition. And this was one of his very first sayings, the saying number 2. Let all who seek until they find, let all who seek until they find, and when they find, they will be disturbed. And when they are disturbed, they will marvel, and it will rule over the universe. It all begins with seeking. If you want to know the truth of something, you have to search for it. That's Stephen Patterson's thought on the wisdom tradition. So pay attention, think about things. Those are part of what this saying too is talking about. Some things will bother you. Think about things that bother you and disturb you. So we've come to the end of the belief. I want to have a little bit of time. We don't have much, but we have come to the end of the Beyond Belief book. And Pagels said the hardest thing and most exciting thing for her was to unlearn what she thought she already knew. So what have you all learned or unlearned from reading Pagels' book? And this is your chance to share what you think or don't think about her book. Don't like, don't like.
Well, the Christian journey has not just been a mystery. From the very beginning, people advocating their speaking. And the history of our own tradition, Martin Luther labeled that journey of a people. I think the words are very important. That your whole life you're seeking to understand.
I guess I've learned that as we've read these heresies, for which people gave their lives many times, they're things that aren't so foreign to us, really. I mean, some of them are appealing when it comes to being on a spiritual journey. And I guess it makes me think, you know, I need to listen more to the people that I disagree with.
Okay. You be open to
Be
a
open,
different thought.
be open to, you know, others' ideas. You know, I don't have all the ideas, but they have ideas too, and it's good to talk about those.
Pagels was the one person, and it was this book, that taught me there's a different way of looking at it. I always thought, you know, you read the Bible, you all talk about the language of the Bible, and everybody talks about what that means. And then it was that narrower viewpoint. And she broadened it, and then each book that I've read since this book has broadened my viewpoint. Okay, there's historical context here. There's all of these people in the first 300 years battling over what it meant, which is what Christianity became. I mean, that's not, you can't get that from just reading the Bible. So I love this way of reading the Bible. That's who I am.
Well, it's interesting. I thought that people can read the exact same words and they don't understand it the same way.
Right. And they were doing that for centuries.
And some of them got to be called heretics because they read it differently, even though they read the same words.
Well, and even Irenaeus, he was in favor than out of favor. And part of it was some of his beliefs Christianity doesn't believe anymore.
Yeah.
You know, so it's just like,
Back row here.
Like Thomas said, the more you know about your universe, the more you can control it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a notion in psychology called locus of control. People who don't have a good internal locus of control, but feel like they're subject to all of the winds and waves of life with nothing to say about it, are never happy. They're not psychologically well. They're, you know, probably angry a lot of the time. And people who have a good internal locus of control and, you know, want to learn more and to read and to exercise some decisions in their life process tend to be happier and more successful. And that's been shown many times over now.
Okay.
Yeah. So I feel like, as I've listened to this for weeks and weeks, I feel like, you know, this people on a spiritual journey who are searching and gaining knowledge and so forth are increasing their locus of control, and they're going to be better people for it. Whereas if we just give to the end of the orthodoxy and say, well, I accept the dogma and that's all I need, we're relinquishing the right to exercise who we are as humans, the human spirit.
This is something about people say, you can only to worry about only things that you can control. If you can't control it, it's out of your realm of influence.
Well, yeah, that's what the Serenity book is all about.
But Pagels, I appreciate her books for giving me some Jewish context to like parables and whatnot, because I didn't know that much about Jewish perspective in Jesus. And then that book, St. Peter versus St. Paul, I thought that was very interesting to know the two factions in the early church that were trying to navigate and figure out who Christ was. And they had different.
Yeah.
And Paul won.
yeah. Pauline's.
Well, next week we're going to begin a new book. And Jane, what do you want to say about that?
Start reading Job.
Job.
That's the chapter to read. Read Job. I don't know how long is Job. I actually haven't read it. So I'm going to be reading Job, and then I'm going to be talking from this book about Job.
Okay.
Handbook on the wisdom books and Psalms, and Job is the first wisdom book. Now we have 3 over here, if you want one, but the teachers are going to be reading, because some of them are like 100 pages, so we're not going to be going through the chapters. I mean, if you got a lot of time, take a book. I'm looking at Eloise.
Oh, Eloise, come on.
Otherwise, read Job. That's all I'm asking of you.
Yeah, so we
Yeah.
read Job in the Bible.
Yes.
Right.
What's in the book.
Read Job, and then I'll be referring to
I'll
Job
reread
from
Job.
this book. That's my plan.
Or-
Hopefully I can do it in 1 week, but we'll see. I'll let you know.